Hey guys, I want to talk about the US CPI inflation reading that has just come out from the US on Thursday. Now, with this reading, this is actually the highest level of inflation we have seen since 1982, which is 40 years ago. Now, in this video, I'm going to go into a bit more detail as well explain to you why this could actually be just the beginning. There could be more inflation down the track, and why some of the ways we're looking to deal with this inflation may cause something like a downtrend or even a recession. We're looking at something between a rock and a hard place. Let's get to it. Now, I'm just going to jump into what happened on the stock market on the day of release of this CPI data. Now, with the CPI data, I've got to add 7.5% inflation, and the real inflation is far more than that. And also, it was across the board. It wasn't just food and energy inflation now. All the other areas like rents, clothing, transportation, that's going up too. So let's look at what happened in the stock market. Now, what you will see in front of you is actually the quite significant decline of the stock market, specifically the S&P 500, as a general measure. Now, before it started dropping, it was actually about 4,580 points, and it dropped all the way to 4,490. Probably ended up to 4,500. So it nearly dropped. It dropped 80 points, and that's nearly 100 points of the S&P 500. So that's a major drop from the day one of this announcement. Now, let's just add into perspective what more could be in line. In fact, this is such a disastrous CPI read. It's probably technically the most disastrous inflation reading since 40 years, since, maybe before the time you were born, if you're watching this. This is the stuff that generations ago we haven't seen. And it's so much so that the Federal Reserve, Bullard, who is the chair of the president of the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, he actually said, I want to see 100 basis points increase by July the 1st. I'd like to see 100 basis points. That's a full 1%. And that's quite dramatic, because for all this time, we've been talking about only 0.5% hikes in March with Jay Powell. And now what we're hearing now from other people in the Federal Reserve is that let's look at full 1% and then some. And I'm going to go and quote him here that it may not necessarily just be a full 1% increase, which would have dramatic effects considering the level of debt in America as well as globally is insane. It's astronomical. The US government has $30 trillion in debt. A 1% increase in interest could potentially bankrupt them. And you can imagine for other corporations, a 1% increase for all the households that are indebted with credit card debt, buy now, pay later, car loans, student loans, mortgages, of course. It's going to have a huge effect. And that's what they're pushing for, a 1% increase. And I'll continue here. He's so vehement on this that he's saying you have got the highest inflation in 40 years. And I think we're going to have to be far more nimble and far more reactive to the data. Now, why is this important? Well, what he's saying is that maybe we can cut rates right now, right here and now. And it's supposed to highlight, and I hope it does highlight, the shift in mentality and the emergency status that this is having. This is looking like a crisis or an emergency for inflation. The inflation is getting out of control. That's code for that. And the other thing he said, well, this is what is so interesting about it. I gotta add. So this is on Bloomberg. Other Fed officials have expressed general support for moving gradually in terms of hiking, increasing interest rates gradually. And Bullard himself gave a speech a decade ago in which he said a shock and awe approach was rarely warranted. But on Thursday, he said the surprisingly high inflation data from October to January calls for a response. I do not think it is shock and awe, Bullard said, noting that markets are already pricing in significant moves. I think it is a sensible approach to a surprise inflationary shock that we got during 2021 that we did not expect. Well, I suppose you could say maybe it was a surprise only to you, to the Federal Reserve. So what this actually sets up is massive, sudden increases in interest rates, even perhaps before the monthly meetings that the Federal Reserve may be having. And this would have tremendous impacts on not just the US, but also globally. And let me go into detail exactly about how dire this situation actually is in dealing with global and specifically US inflation. We're going to look into the global side of things too. Here is Fed's Bostic says more than three hikes possible this year. We need to see how economy responds. This was on the 9th of February. This is a couple of days ago. And this is a Fed official saying 3 hikes, which is about, each hike is about 0.25% increase. He's saying 3 hikes, and that could be quite substantial. Right now, Bullard just said, I'm expecting 4 hikes by June, and that's a full 1%, 4 hikes. Let me go into what the real expectation on Wall Street is. Here we go. Bank of America forecasts 7 rate hikes in 2022 and paying. Now, I won't go into the pain part. I'll go at the end of the video. But 7 rate hikes is 1.75%. That is huge. Just to put into context, we dropped from 2.5% in March of 2020, a sudden emergency decrease to 0% by the Federal Reserve in March of 2020, and we can see what happened to the stock market. It went straight ballistically up. And as well as that, they printed about 40% of all the US dollars ever created in existence, which probably explains the inflation. But here we're doing the reverse. We're stopping all the asset purchases and we're jacking up the interest rates. Bank of America says 7 rate hikes. That is 1.75% by the end of the year. And not only that, other banks are looking like they're doing that too. And let me show you just a moment. Goldman Sachs from Bloomberg. Goldman Sachs now predicts Fed to hike 7 times in 2022. So that's another major bank. I would say a lot of the banks are actually pricing in multiple rate hikes. Maybe we're looking at 2% increase. If dropping 2% could fix the whole economy in 2020 and get the stock market going up, what would increasing 2% do to the economy and as well as that, the stock market? That's something we really need to just digest, because right now changes, the delta in interest rates is more sensitive than ever. Now, let me go into what really happened. Now, this article says whispers on emergency Fed rate hike as soon as tomorrow. Now, as I'm making this video, it is the 10th of Feb is 11th of Feb in the US, and where I am, it is a bit earlier than that, 11th of Feb. And so by the time you watch this, we may have already hiked. Now, why is this possible? Let's look at this chart here. This is the February Fed Fund Futures implied yield. And what this actually is a contract. It's like a bond, and which is supposed to pay a yield or interest rate. And this contract, the February contract, ends on the 28th of Feb. And that is about 2 weeks away. Now, just a bit more than 2 weeks away. And that is also another 2 weeks away from the actual rate hike that we're supposed to have in March the 16th, right? Now we're on around the 11th of February. Only 2 weeks to go until this contract completely expires. Now we can see that the interest rate for this, the yield has jumped from 0.1 to 0.13 already. How can that be? Our rate hike in March doesn't happen until March. We have a contract that ends in February and it's already going up in interest rates. That is interesting. And what this translates into, I can read here, plugging in the numbers, a 13 basis points increase in the Feb contract means there is now a 30% chance of an emergency rate hike. That's what Wall Street is pricing in. 1 in 3 chance we'll have an emergency rate hike right now. So Wall Street's thinking it. The Fed's Bullard's thinking it. I'm sure the Fed is very busy right now discussing what to do because they're already behind the curve. They know it. They're admitting it, right? Now, here's another factor I want to talk about. This inflation is out of control on the global level. Food prices are pretty much all-time highs. We're reaching the highs again, $90 oil, right? And that's not necessarily going down anytime soon. And I also want to add into the fact that changing interest rates takes a little bit of time to work through the economy. Some people actually say it takes 18 months to actually affect the economy. So if you just imagine 18 months without this really impacting the economy, and we could have up to 18 months of further high inflation. By the time that happens, we are going to have a hole burnt through our wallet because of all the purchasing power that's been lost with our money right now. This is absolutely insane. And I'm sure you're experiencing that when you're going to the shopping, when you're doing your shopping. Now, I want to also talk about more structurally in deeper why this inflation may, even if we do raise interest rates and that takes effect, why this may not stop the inflation. So protect yourself accordingly. So one thing is the oil prices. Oil prices are continuing to go up because we're doing these green policy, we're implementing green policies and mandates throughout the Western economies. Shareholders and so on and so forth are pushing energy companies to become more focused on solar and wind, less on natural gas and oil. That is putting supply constraints. We're not investing in any oil fields right now. And so that oil is already $90 a barrel, right? And so that really can only go up because our use of oil is not significantly decreasing unless we switch over to electric vehicles right away. But we're not investing in new oil fields, so those new production, the refineries and the producers, they're shutting down, right? So oil is shutting down faster than we can stop using oil, at least in regards to personal cars. The other thing is we're actually starting to experience inflation in terms of wage increases, which also cements the inflation, because if you are now getting paid more and you're paying for things more, I mean, the price of whatever you're paying the shops, that reflects your wage. If your wage also goes up, the prices that you pay in the supermarket or wherever also go up. Everything is starting to go up. It's sort of like a vicious cycle. The vicious cycle is already starting and it can go out of control. And so I want to end this video with just a thought experiment. Right now, we have $30 trillion in the US debt. And the US is the leader of the Western or the global financial system. Now, if we were to raise interest rates by, let's say, nearly 2% with 7 rate hikes, what would actually happen to the economy? How can we actually control inflation? And so the thought experiment is the only way to control inflation is to crush the economy. Maybe to slow it down, hopefully to an extent where not everything's completely collapsing around us. But with these sort of things, in terms of really slowing down the economy by raising interest rates, then you never know how far you actually go. You could actually go overboard and then crash the whole economy. Now let's think about the idea that it crashes for a moment. Now, if it actually crashes and the economy crashes, then yes, yay, we got inflation under control, which is a massive, massive issue. But the issue is we now are in a recession. What are they going to do in a recession? Well, the Fed Reserve has two mandates. It's got one is to have price stability, so not to have too much inflation. The second mandate they have is to keep employment as high as possible and reduce unemployment. Now, as unemployment goes up in the recessionary environment, then their other mandate comes into play, and they could, in theory, prioritize, and they probably will, prioritize having a stronger economy with more jobs and lower unemployment over inflation, because they can say that, hey, we're helping everyone when they get their jobs, but with inflation, it affects everyone equally. So the rich are affected by inflation and the poor are affected by inflation. So it's politically better to focus on getting more jobs for people and getting out of the pain of recession. And they're going to prioritize that. Now, if that happens, they're going to reduce the interest rates in an inflationary environment, which causes more and more inflation. So at that point, I'll probably go make a video on that, on how to really protect against inflation or how to take advantage of inflation. But like a sneak peek is probably maybe you want to borrow money and, buy property, which, whittles away the amount of debt with inflation. That could be a technique. But that is something that really need to look into. Now, if you like the video, please hit the like button. And if you want to watch more of this type of style of video, please hit the subscribe button. I can also, I really want to thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. More to come with this whole inflation rate hike story. See you then. Ciao. Bye.